Hi everyone, thank you for coming. Who am I? My name is Holly, for those of you who don't know me. Most of you do know me. I used to live in Manchester, and I worked for a really long time in kind of urban community growing setting, and also more formal horticulture, and always growing food, kind of soil to plate projects. And through all that time I was always a seed saver. We used to do work with the Heritage Seed Library, and I used to save a lot of seed with my community groups. And at kind of some point I just felt the urge to do more, and I wanted to understand more about our food and seed system. So I transitioned into market gardening, and I have since worked at Oxton Organics and Trill Farm Garden, been lucky to work at both of these amazing market gardens. And both of those places have a real connection to seed. So even though they're veggie farms, there's this kind of undercurrent of seed saving. In fact, at Trill we grow seed on contract for a couple of UK seed companies, so seed is definitely a big part of the business there. So my journey into seed has kind of continued, so much so that I also now work for the Gaia Foundation Seed Sovereignty Programme. So those of you that haven't heard of... Oh, can you hear me? Those of you that haven't heard of the Gaia Foundation Seed Sovereignty Programme, we are very much about empowering people like yourselves to grow open pollinated, locally adapted, UK grown seed. We do introduction to seed saving courses, we run year-long training programme, we come out to events like this and share all the amazing joy of growing seed. And there's a regional coordinator based in any part of the UK and Ireland that you're in. So if you're interested in finding out more about being a seed grower, or just more interested in learning more about seed, then definitely reach out to your regional coordinator. So I'm now working for them, back working for the Gaia Foundation 2 days a week. As I've been doing all of this work, I've been becoming more and more aware of some of the issues of our current seed system. And in 2023 I applied for a Churchill Fellowship. And so this year I actually took a season off growing, and I went to the Pacific Northwest in the US and Canada, packed my bags, headed across the Atlantic, and spent 4 months in that area with this thriving seed community, exploring what might be possible in the world of seed. Okay, I'm behind on my slides. So why are we here today? I just wanted to do a quick temperature check in the room. So who here either owns or works for a seed company? Put your hand up. Great. Who has ever grown seed on contract for a UK-based seed company? Who has grown seed on their market garden or farm to reuse on their farm or to share within their community? Amazing. You're all seed savers already. And who, in any way, shape or form, has ever grown and saved seed? Ah, this is awesome! Yay! There's loads of you! So, basically, you've all come here today because you're drawn to seed, and clearly a lot of you are already seed savers. And what I wanted to emphasise is that we can all be seed savers. It's really, really old knowledge. Seeds and humans have co-evolved since the beginning of time. We've selected plants from their wild ancestors, and we've brought them into cultivation, and we've always worked in this reciprocal way, which has been beneficial to plants and humans and all the living beings involved. But it feels like somewhere along the way we've kind of forgotten that reciprocity. I feel like I'm preaching to people that are already seed saving, but for those of you that aren't, it does feel like there's been this kind of disconnect, and the impact of that we're only really now fully realising. Because seed, for me, is at the heart of our food system, and it's the thing that is most often least considered, and it's often taken for granted. This is a scary statistic. I don't want to be all doom and gloom, but I am going to go a little bit into the sad stuff. But we've lost 75% of the genetic diversity in our crops over the last century, and the reasons for this you all know. It's the globalisation of our food system, it's the industrialisation of agriculture, it's also a lot to do with modern plant breeding methods. We have quite strict legislation around how we can register and market varieties in the UK, and we have something called the Distinct, Uniform and Stable Rule, which means varieties have to be proven to be distinct, uniform and stable before they can be registered. And all of this is contributing to this kind of erosion of genetic diversity. Now, this is probably a familiar slide for many of you. It's used a lot, but I can't help it, it's quite useful to use again. But it shows the consolidation of our seed industry. Just 4 corporations now own 60% of the world's germplasm. And we've got ourselves into this situation where seed has become a bit of a commodity. It's taken for granted, as I said, and people don't really consider where it comes from. They just buy it and order it online and it arrives in the post. And farmers feel like, well, I feel like as a farmer I've got a serious lack of power and agency when it comes to seed, and also the varieties that I grow. This has been touched on a little bit, a couple of talks today, but most investment in plant breeding over recent decades has been in producing F1 hybrids. Now, at the Seed Sovereignty Programme, we're all about open pollinated seed. Now, hybrids are definitely important, and many people have mentioned today how they provide that reliability and uniformity for growers, which is really important. The problem is that they contribute to the commodification of our seed system. If they're held within a local system and traded with a local system, then it doesn't feel like there's such a problem. But at the moment, as we've seen, back to my other slide, a few large companies hold the monopoly on this seed system. F1 hybrids are only genetically stable for 1 generation, which means if you want to continue growing that variety, you need to return to the breeder or the seed company every year and repurchase that seed each year. So if you really want true seed sovereignty, then we need quality, open pollinated varieties that do well in our organic systems and allow growers to save seed from them year after year. Now, on top of all that, a little bit more doom and gloom, we're currently importing something like 80% of our seed into the UK. That, for me, is really shocking, because what happens when those seed that you order don't arrive in the post? I mean, we had a little snippet of what happens during the pandemic, but it also feels a little bit like we've forgotten that quite quickly and how seed became quite unavailable. Now, as I mentioned, I'm trying not to be all doom and gloom. I just wanted to kind of give the lie of the land a little bit to start with. But what I'm trying to hammer home is that seed really matters. Seed is at the heart of our food system, and although there's quite a lot of focus at the moment on soil health, on wider ecosystem health, on all of these organic and regenerative farming practices, those conversations, in my experience, rarely include seed, and most of us accept that it's just another input, another commodity. And for me, it feels like this system isn't working. And as organic growers, I feel like we're also a little bit complicit in this, because we've become complacent and we're just accepting this current system. Now, we do have some amazing organic seed producers and growers in the UK. Thanks, Kate. Real Seeds, great seed company. Yeah. But not nearly enough. We still buy in, as I've mentioned, a huge proportion of our organic seed. And when that's not available, non-organic seed is often used. And that seed isn't really suitable for organic systems. It's been grown in systems with very different approaches to soil health, often in a different country completely, placed in systems with very different inputs and different priorities. But as I mentioned, this has kind of just been accepted. It's something we've just accepted as the norm, and it feels like we're stuck in a little bit of a rut. We've become a little bit conservative in our actions, dare I say. And I think, was it Andy earlier was talking about the varieties, and some people with the hybrids and things swearing on varieties that work year on year. But unless you're stewarding those seed, as we've all seen, because of the consolidation of our seed industry, a seed company might decide no longer to stock that variety, and that variety could easily be taken away from us. So just assuming that those same varieties will also do well year after year, we've all seen how quickly our climate is changing and the chaos that is occurring. Then with all that unpredictability, we can't guarantee that that variety that's worked well for you for the last 20 years is going to perform well for you this year or next year. So where is our locally resilient seed going to come from if it's not going to come from us? It feels like it's time to try something different. So I'm here today to try and share a glimpse of a different way of being, a kind of new paradigm, and I'd like you to come on a journey with me into the radical possibilities of seed. Now, before I go on, can we just talk about how amazing seed is? Seed is incredible. A tiny seed contains all that's needed to grow into a full-blown plant that will feed and nourish us and the many thousands of living beings it encounters in its life cycle, A plant, if allowed, will set seed with hundreds, if not thousands, of seeds to ensure that there's a continuation of its genetics. And these plants are inherently abundant. They just want to give. If any of you have ever allowed a brassica crop to go to seed, then you're going to know what I'm talking about. You know that you'll end up with far more seed than you could ever need. The very nature of seed saving encourages you to share. I think it's really, really hard to be selfish when you're a seed saver. In many ways, seeds have a power to build community because they're asking to be shared and swapped and traded. Now, seeds also share this canny trick of adapting to local conditions. They form relationships with the microbial life in the soil. They have microbiomes just like us, and these are passed on through the seed. So if you save this seed year on year, then you might find that your plants grow better, and you might find that your seedlings germinate faster, and you might find that your crops become more vigorous and produce bigger yields. And this, hopefully, will make them more resilient. Saving seed, to me, it feels like you're saving a memory of that year and the many years before that. In our current climate chaos, think of how valuable it could be to have plants that just remember that extreme drought that we had last summer, or the cold, wet spring that we've had this year, or that early frost that's just happened. Seed saving brings resilience. I think that plants have a lot to teach us. So as I mentioned, this summer I've been on this big epic journey in the Pacific Northwest, and I've immersed myself in a network of farmers that are very much embracing these radical possibilities of seed. And they're also demonstrating, from my experience of spending time with them, in what could be possible if we step outside the constraints of these modern agricultural systems. I spent 4 months travelling around the Pacific Northwest, and I still wasn't able to meet or visit all of the seed stewards that I wanted to see. Now that gives you an idea of the sheer number of people that are involved in the seed network there. What I encountered was this abundance of people, and it made me realise something I already knew, but it definitely brought it home, is that we need more people growing seed. There's so much space for more of you to get involved and grow seed. What I'd like to do is to step into this notion of abundance, because when I was in the Pacific Northwest, there wasn't any sense of competition between the seed companies or people producing seed. It was like all of these producers had found their niche. In fact, when I was spending time with Don Tipping and Lane Selman in Portland, they had this great conversation where they used this analogy of the seed companies all being like the groups that you'd find in a kind of classic 80s or 90s American high school movie. So there would be your jocks, and there would be your geeks, and there'd be your punk anarchists. They've all found this little niche, which means it all works. And very much like the plants they were growing, which all had their niche, it just kind of was a synergy, and it was really, really amazing to see. And I think with more people doing that work, we're creating that all-important diversity. I was really, really fortunate enough to meet Carol Deppy, who's quite a famous plant breeder, while I was away, and she said something that really resonated and has stuck with me, and she said, you breed your own values right into the variety. It feels like by bringing a bit of our personalities to the selection process as seed keepers, then we're all going to be breeding plants that are just a little bit different to everything else and to how other people are doing it, so that the more people we have doing this work, the more diversity will emerge. So in my mind, we need lots of folks stewarding and guiding these crops, because you've all got different priorities and preferences, and you're all working towards a similar goal of producing quality organic seed. And that leads me on to this notion of intentional stewardship. It's the thing in my mind that creates that niche. I've identified and talked about all the logical and kind of scary reasons why we should be saving seed, but all of that is irrelevant unless there's, for me, a connection at a much deeper level. The culture, the relationship, that feels really essential, because we can breed and save all the seed we want from novel and shiny varieties, but unless they really mean something to us and to the individual doing the seed saving, then are they going to stick? I think we need to step outside of this model of commodity and scarcity and grow crops that have a purpose. We need to weave these varieties back into our lives and into our culture. So when people ask me, what should you start with, what seed should you save, I think the best advice I could give is save something that you love, because there needs to be real intention and purpose behind your actions. Now, this is a fennel variety that is being grown by Brian and Christine at Uprising Seeds. Now, they're in Bellingham in Washington State. And Brian and Christine have a really strong notion of intentional stewardship. Everything they grow has culinary value, and they taste and eat everything that they save as seed and sell in their catalogue. Even some of the varieties, they grow some varieties just for one recipe. So they'll have like one thing they make once a year, and they'll grow that variety just for that recipe. And they share these stories with their customers. They have these beautiful stories on their website. So when you buy this seed, you get this glimpse behind why they've chosen to steward it and what you could do with this seed. It's real kind of intention and purpose behind the seed that they're growing. And I think that storytelling is really important part of this storytelling. Storytelling is a really important part of the story. It's bringing people along on the journey, and essentially it's building that community that I've talked about. And community and sharing, again, really, really essential for building this kind of radical movement of change. Because the dominant narrative in our modern world is that humans can exist in isolation. Everything lives in relationship to everything else, and we as humans are absolutely no exception to that rule. Modern agriculture isolates and creates otherness, and I think that this is causing real deep harm. When I was away, I was exposed to this really intensely rich and vibrant community that embraced this power of collaboration. A key player in this network was Lane Selman in the Culinary Breeding Network. Now, she is this amazing person that bridges the gap between seed breeders, between farmers, seed growers, chefs, consumers, and she's bringing everyone together at these incredible events that she holds every year called Variety Showcases. And I was really, really fortunate enough to get to attend one of these events while I was in Portland. And she works from the start of the year partnering seed breeders or farmers with a chef, and together they get to showcase something they're really proud of that they're growing, or a really interesting new variety that they've been working on. And they get to share that with members of the public. And this is just, as you can see from this picture, if you can see, it's like a thrumming event. There's just hundreds, I think there were like 700 people at this event that was only about 3 or 4 hours long. There's just this incredible sense of community, and it makes everyone feel part of the seed saving process, because you're not separate. The people that are growing the seed are talking to the people that are eating the food, and there's an opportunity for direct feedback. And it means that people become more invested in their food and where it comes from. They're participating in all stages of this process. Now, arguably, these variety showcases are an example of a way of kind of community on a mass scale, mass participation in seed stewardship. But participatory ways of working can also be harnessed in many other ways to incite this change. These participatory breeding projects are an alternative way of working that is centred on this notion of collaboration. Rather than the breeders sitting in their glass towers away from everyone else, that are actually the people that are actually eating and growing their varieties, these participatory projects offer an opportunity for that direct feedback in creating varieties that are relevant to their end users. It's also a way of speeding the breeding process up. So while I was away, I also got to meet plant breeder Jim Myers, who's based at Oregon State University. Now, he's been working in this participatory way for many years, and he actually kind of harnesses the power in creating new varieties. An example of one of his projects was he identified that there were very few good organic broccoli varieties left. So he found as many of the good ones that he could, and he grew them all out, allowed them all to cross, and he actually sent the seed of that cross off to many farmers in his network, and they all then got to steward these seeds and grow them on in their own farms, and over several generations make selections that were relevant to them in their organic conditions. And through making this mass cross, he mixed up all these genetics, and new varieties were created, and people got to steward those. And there's actually been 2 or 3 new varieties of organic broccoli that have been released onto the market through this participatory project, and the farmers got to do that. It kind of shows how that farmers can be seed innovators and seed stewards. We can be maintaining and developing these varieties that are relevant to us on our farms. Now, I appreciate that all of this involves thinking outside the box a little bit and also taking some risks. And I know we've talked about this a lot through the day. I've heard many people talk about it, is that we're all stretched, we're working to tight margins, we're all under a lot of pressure. But I don't feel like things are going to get any easier the way they are. the system isn't really working anyway, and through making these changes we may lose something, but we could gain a hell of a lot. And if we can embrace these possibilities of seed, and through these collaboration and participatory projects, we can all share that risk. At the Seed Sovereignty Programme, we're working towards these possibilities. We definitely teach traditional seed keeping practices, which is really important, but also once you've got a grasp of that, we then think about the ways we can break the rules. So this year, inspired by some of the projects I've visited and different things I'd heard about that were going on in the States, I've been running a crowd breeding project with a group of 18 farmers from across the UK and Ireland. And we've been exploring how we go about growing diverse populations, a bit like how Jim Myers, I mentioned, started this broccoli project. Now this emerged from this sense of urgency to do something more and find new ways of working. It feels like subtle and slow regional adaptation these days isn't quite enough with our current climate and the way it's changing so quickly, and I think we need to think a bit more radically. So this idea of growing diverse populations, it isn't new, it's old knowledge, it's how many Indigenous people still grow their food today. But it involves thinking outside the box a little bit because you aren't isolating varieties. So that basic idea is that you grow a crop as a flock. So you'd select maybe 6, 7, 8 varieties of, say, beetroot that you really like, and rather than isolating them, as you would if you wanted to keep that variety stable, you allow them all to cross-pollinate. You mix them all up, allow this promiscuous pollination. It's not quite the anarchy that it sounds like. There are some selection criteria that you apply to it, but the idea is that you allow these genetics to roam more freely, and therefore, over time, you can create more resilience in your flock, because rather than have a variety that is almost identical genetically, you have some plants in your flock that might be able to survive that drought that you had that summer, and you have some plants that might be able to survive that cold, wet spring. So you wouldn't lose all of your crop if there was an extreme weather event. Everything isn't identical to its neighbour, so it just means that you have more chance of some plants in your population surviving and you getting a yield at the end of the day. As I've said time and time again, we need more of everything. I think there's a place for everything. So I don't want these diverse populations to dismiss all these amazing stable varieties that we do have here, and also the historical and cultural relevance that is applied to a lot of those heirloom cultivars and heirloom varieties. But it feels like now isn't the time to rest on our laurels, and we really need to explore all of our options and embrace everything we can to bring diversity and produce resilience and adaptability in our crops. Now, diverse populations offer opportunity for resilience, but they also offer opportunity for real inspiration. There is so much joy in growing these diverse populations. We're so used to these monocultures, so we get fields and fields of one crop, but we also, even within our own market gardens, a bed of all the plants that look very similar. But when you grow a population, there is so much abundance and diversity there. I find them really inspirational. There's just something very, very fundamentally joyous about working with these populations. And also, they offer a lot of inspiration to maybe dabble in plant breeding, and you could become the next Frank Morton. Now, Frank is someone I met on my travels that many of you may have heard of. If you haven't heard of him, you've probably eaten one of the lettuces that he's responsible for producing. He's been plant breeding for nearly 40 years and has focused a lot on lettuce. He actually is responsible for bringing a lot of the red pigmentation in lettuce onto the market. Now, he deliberately creates diversity to give others the opportunity to make selections that will be right for their climate and location. So he sells seed that is deliberately genetically diverse so that other farmers can have a chance of breeding their own crops and experimenting with the idea of plant breeding. Diversity breeds diversity, and the benefits could be exponential. Now, all of this is in a bit of a liminal space, and I know that change is quite hard, but I feel that to carry on in the status quo is quite simply disastrous, because it feels like so much more is possible. This feels like it's deep healing work, and it's going to involve shaking off old ways of being and trusting and respecting each other and all the other living beings around us. It also involves really understanding that we are just a thread in this complex tapestry of life. Now, Now I'm going to end on a quote from Brian at Uprising Seeds, who I mentioned earlier, because they were a real inspiration for me on my travels. But I think it beautifully sums up what could be possible. My hope has always been that, in this work, seeds will be a force of connectivity in our world, an opportunity to learn about and from one another, a way to connect with the cycles of the seasons and our places, and a way to connect our past and our future with our present selves. I realise I said that very quickly, and I know I read a lot of my notes, but my brain is so full from all my travels that I tried doing a presentation last week without my notes, and it went wrong. So I rambled through that fast, and there's loads of time for questions. So. Yeah, I meant to say that. Thanks, Jane. Yes, so the crowd breeding project I mentioned is going to continue. So at the moment, as I said, there's 18 growers from across the UK and Ireland. They are growing 3 crops, so it's very much a collaborative community project. They decided which 3 crops they wanted to grow as these diverse populations. And they've been growing them out this year. This is the first year, so that is when all those varieties that I mentioned are going to cross. So arguably not till probably the year after next we'll start to see anything really interesting happen. But they will be, all those seeds will come back to me and I will re-pull them all and send them out. And then the idea is that next year we're going to be opening it up to more participants. So if you are interested in participating in the crowd breeding project and having a go at dabbling in diverse populations and a bit of plant breeding, then yeah, do keep an eye on all of the Seed Sovereignty Programme social media, or come and have a chat to me and I can take your email address. We'll also probably be doing at least one more crop next year, and yeah, we'll be exploring different ways of experimenting with crowd breeding. Is that what, did you ask me anything else?
That was it.
Thanks.
Maybe just, I think most of us on our farm are already doing quite a lot of stuff.
Yeah.
And then there's the question of, if we want to go into seed breeding, where is it like the easiest and still effective way to start? Where should we start, and what would you maybe still for the moment leave to the professionals which are specialized on seeds? Like, what wedges do you feel like there is worth a start, or are
That's a
there
good
parts
question.
of a breeding process that can be done on farm and then the rest of it is done by specialists? For example, we can grow our carrots and before harvest we make the selections, but the second year of the seed production is done by someone else. Or
I think the easiest thing to do, I think I mentioned, was to start with something you love and start with something that you grow a lot of and you're confident in growing, because you're taking that plant through its whole life cycle. And as market growers, we often just, we grow something up to a certain point, but we often don't grow it beyond that. So you want to be growing something that you're really confident in growing and familiar with in the first place. A really easy way to start, so there's different crops. You have the kind of outbreeders and the inbreeders, and the inbreeders are plants, they're crops that are much easier to start with because they don't require as much isolation. So if you are just starting out on your seed saving journey, then I would definitely recommend maybe tomatoes or peas, something like that doesn't involve keeping things too separate, and you'll probably you'll have enough to save seed from, especially from tomatoes. They're so prolific in their seeds, so, well, most varieties. But yeah, you'll be able to do that easily. And then I guess things that, potentially varieties that you really, really love, that you do buy from the seed company every year, that potentially there might be a risk that they might disappear because that seed company might not, if they're not across many seed companies, and if they're not carried on to be grown by that seed company, then they might drop off a catalogue. So things that you love that maybe you're suddenly becoming aware aren't as easy to get every year, then stewarding those would be a good place to start.
Oh. Can I just throw out a theoretical question?
Yeah.
Do you think that chefs are the right people to collaborate with? Now, I only ask that because I grow quite a lot of row 7 varieties, so some of you may know, and they are a chef-breeder collaboration. And I find them very particular.
Yeah.
And I can see why the chefs love them. And the one of us at Real Seeds, who is a chef background, walks in and picks them out. And I, with my admittedly home garden grower in my mind, I often think that maybe they are not as productive. They're very beautiful, but they're not necessarily as broad spectrum or as productive or as resilient as I. So I've always wondered, there's a lot to talk about how you collaborate with chefs, or should we actually be collaborating with home cooks?
Yeah, no, I agree. I think the Culinary Breeding Network are really good at that. So the event partners a chef with a seed breeder or a farmer that's growing seed, but that's just to showcase that variety at the event. But it's intended for the people that are going to eat that to give their feedback. So the chef obviously has a bit of input because they're like, oh, that doesn't do what I want it to, or that's great. But actually the end user is the consumer, so the people that have bought tickets to attend the event are often people that are kind of just interested in where their food comes from or want to know a bit more. And that's where the feedback comes from. So I think, and it's not just the only way she does it either. She does it in many different ways of like going out and having other events and celebrations and kind of getting the consumer or the person that's going to the farmer's market or their local store to buy this produce an opportunity to feed back to the plant breeders. So I think, yeah, there's definitely growing chefs for chefs is a niche. So plant breeding for chefs is a niche, but I think, yeah, I agree. I think there's.
I mean, it's definitely the right way to go. It's like you have only to be sharp in a mirror to realise the disadvantage of not including
Yeah.
culinary. Has anyone grown sharp in mirror? It's a potato. You will never grow hungry if you grow sharp in mirror. It is utterly bomb-proof. It's the wrong most variety.
Yeah.
There's a reason that 20 years ago you probably would have grown if you were a lot at least, and it is utterly bomb-proof.
But I think on that, if you're saving seed on your farm, then just eat what you're saving from. I mean, that's something that's so often forgotten. And people save seed, like, yeah, I've saved the seed. It's like, did it taste any good? Like, because things can, genetics can drift. Even if you're saving from a stable variety, like things can change. So you can save the squash, but if you've not tried it, you could be saving one that doesn't taste that great, and then that's perpetuating that not great taste to the next generation. So, like Brian and Christine at Uprising Seed literally eating the food, eating the crop is a priority over saving seed from it, and they're a seed company. Like, they make sure that all of their staff and their family eat what they're saving. So they're making sure that everything that is going into their catalogue tastes great. And I just think that's so important, and that's something that's been lost a lot in our culture, I believe. And that's why I was kind of saying about weaving stuff back into our culture. Like, why are we saving these seed? People were really drawn into the shiny things. I always knew it's novel, but it's like, well, that's great, and like, where's the investment in maintaining that variety over a long time? Because something new and shiny will probably come along next year. So it's about, yeah, bringing those varieties back into our culture and our families, and why are we saving the seed? There's got to be a purpose behind it.
Just a story about the seeds. I ran a food quality testing workshop this morning, which involved fritz testing, but more importantly, taste testing. And in the tomato section, the best tomato was a 16th generation seed grown in Swindon by Cultivating agriculture, where their main philosophy is to save seed back in the same soil year on year on year. And just tasting the quality of that, you can verify the benefits of saving seed, putting it back into the soil, because the quality gets better year on year.
Yeah, and I think if you are saving your seed, then you will notice not just the taste, if you're tasting it before you're making selections and saving, but also the germination rates and the vigour of that plant in your soils. I think, yeah, as I mentioned, I can get geeky about endophytes and microbiome if people want to chat about that later, but just all of that memory of the soil that you're passing on is really important. Oh, yeah.
Question. There was in the talk earlier on.
Oh, I can't hear you. You have to speak up. Sorry.
Thanks for that. Really encouraging. And I wondered, I guess one of the hurdles for growers to save seed is putting aside and looking after a crop that you can't immediately eat.
I'm really sorry. I can't.
The hurdle is putting aside the crop that you can't immediately eat.
Yeah, so then perhaps one of the benefits that I hadn't appreciated explicitly perhaps in saving seed was highlighted in a talk earlier today about beneficial insects living on flowers, and that umbellifers are very good for different bugs that help protect your crops. So that could be an incentive to save carrot seed. Not just about the seed, but also the biodiversity benefits of allowing a plant to go through its entire life cycle. Perhaps that's a draw.
I think I just about caught that. Sorry, I've got a lot of rowdy blackbirds on this side of the tent. Was it about letting the plant go through its whole life cycle?
You gave an amazing talk this morning
Yeah.
about the importance of beneficial
Saw that, yeah.
By having the flowers, and particularly all the umbellifers, actually you can financially justify spending. Well, that's what you're saying. That
You could
we
think
have to
about it like
justify
that.
It marginally, but there's all these other benefits as well as the seed that you need to have flowering plants.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think at Trill that was something that Ash and Kate are really passionate about, in that they will always have seed as part of their market garden because of all the other benefits that they've seen as because of that basically. And things like brassicas overwintering and then letting them flower and go to seed, then Pete was talking about the parasitic wasps earlier, then that's perfect for that. And all of the pollinators and other habitat that's produced by having these plants go through their full life cycle. And the fact that the plants are senescing and then going through their full process, and they will release a lot of important nutrients and exudates back into the soil in the process of senescing and dying in place. So it's a cycle, and by saving seed from them, then you're got all these other exponential benefits. Thank you.
Can I add something to that?
Yeah.
Which is things like carrots or parsnips or whatever. If you're just doing them for your own use on farm, they make a lot of seed, and obviously you need a minimum population for your, for genetic diversity. But it's not that large, and if you dotted them about a tunnel, you'd get all the benefits, and you'd get your seed without really taking up that much space. Just, not if you wanted to grow a commercial crop, but just if you're growing it for on-farm use.
Absolutely, yeah. And as I said, the seed is abundant. You just get so much seed, and can't rave about it enough. Yeah.
I've got a little bit of concern about isolation. So, I've always wanted to grow grasses, grow a huge diversity of grasses, grow ESP, let them go flower.
Yeah.
Biodiversity anyway. But yeah, does that complicate the story idea? I've always done my farming grasses.
So isolation is a challenge, and if you want to keep a stable variety, then you will need you'll need to separate that from any other Brassica oleracea. Along a mile, is it a mile, Kate? It's about a mile.
Than you can do on your farm. So
Yeah.
You could do the other. You could do the non-oleracea species.
Or you could get into diverse populations and just let things mix up a bit. But isolation is a thing.
You could breed the UK let.
But you can, so if you think about it, those plants are biennial, so they're going to flower, you're going to overwinter them and they're going to flower the next year. So isolation doesn't have to be necessarily a physical barrier, it can be in space and time as well. It can be in time as well as space, so there are kind of clever ways of getting around it. And maybe one year you just don't have any other flowering Brassica oleracea. Yeah.
The ones that are making seed flower for biodiversity. That could be PSB.
Yeah, that was what I was saying. Yeah, they're flowering for biodiversity as well, and saving the seed is also helping the population to adapt to the selection pressures of climate change and everything else.
That's short and sweet. Thank you.